Good morning, everyone. We're going to wait just another minute to let people sign in appropriately, and then we'll go through a variety of things to get people set up for this webinar. As I see the participant list increasing exponentially. I apologize, there's no music in the background.
Randall, can you sing?
I could actually. My degree is in voice, but you're not going to get me to do that right now. Sorry. Todd actually has a degree in opera as well. Okay, for the sake of time, I'm going to get things started. Good morning, everyone, or actually good afternoon in some places in the country. I'm Randy Rosenbaum. I'm Executive Director of the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts. Delighted to have you here today for this workshop from the National Endowment for the Arts, particularly geared toward organizations that serve or support people with disabilities. I'd like to point out that this session is being ASL interpreted, and you have the ability to pin the ASL interpreter to your screen if you so wish, or if you desire that service. We normally have closed captioning for these sessions. For some reason, when we switched this from a meeting to a webinar, the service that we have in that regard seemed to have somewhat disappeared. What we will do in this instance is after this is finished, we will take a recording of this session and have it transcribed so that, and then circulated to everyone who is registered for this session. I apologize for the inconvenience related to that. We are also recording the session so that everyone is aware of that. The Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, as many state arts agencies and others do, traditionally open meetings of this importance with a land acknowledgement, and I'd like to do that at this time. It is RISCA, the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, practice to acknowledge that the grounds on which we are meeting are indigenous lands. Our office is in Providence or on the ancestral homelands of the Narragansett Nation. RISCA is a committed ally, and as artists, we honor the indigenous people, their ancestors, the culture, and the artistic representation, past, present, and future. We recognize the continued existence and contributions of indigenous people to our society. And I hope, if you haven't done so already, you take a moment to identify the lands upon which your organization lives. I've been in this business, in the state arts agency business, for 36 years now. I can say without reservation that the staff of the National Endowment for the Arts is the best that exists anywhere. And their leadership and support of state, locals, and arts organizations and individual artists throughout this country is unparalleled. We thank them for their support and their hard work on behalf of the arts and culture in our nation. And we're happy to provide this platform for them to provide this important information to the community writ large. It's also a great joy and pleasure for me to introduce someone who I've had the pleasure of working with in the 27 years that I've been here in Rhode Island. We have, I tell people, the best congressional delegation in the universe. And one of the leaders of that congressional delegation is the representative of the 2nd Congressional District in Rhode Island, the amazing Congressman Jim Langevin. Congressman Langevin has been a strong supporter of the arts. He's been a strong supporter of support and services for people with disabilities. And he's got a portfolio that ranges from cybersecurity to a variety of other important issues. Congressman, delighted to have you here welcoming this group, and thank you for being here. I hope you'll take a few minutes to share some thoughts with us. And I'm going to mute my video while the Congressman does that.
I would love to. And Randy, thank you so much for the kind introduction. And certainly for your friendship over the years, and most especially your leadership at RISCA over many, many years now. And the arts would not be the same without you, your passion and your leadership. And we have so much to be proud of in Rhode Island. So, you know, the arts and the humanities in Rhode Island make us a more vibrant place to live, a more welcoming place to live. And it's just such an important part of our identity. So I have some prepared remarks, of course, but I just wanted to say that. And I also wanted to take this opportunity to welcome Diane, board chair of the National Endowment, Diane Dewhirst, who just spoke before the event started, and is reminding me how long she had been on Nancy Pelosi's staff, and certainly big loss to the Congress and to Nancy Pelosi and all of us when Diane moved on, but doing great things now. Only 16 days on the job, she reminded me, but welcome to you, Diane, and congratulations, and look forward to working with you on this, your new role. So I would just start off some brief words, and then I'll turn it back over to you, Randy. But again, great to be here, albeit virtually, with the National Endowment for the Arts and the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts, to hear more about funding opportunities made possible by the American Rescue Plan. You know, we fought hard to make sure there were dollars in there for the arts, for the humanities. It is so many of the artists and folks that are involved in the humanities community again contribute in meaningful ways to our society. These are jobs, and they help ensure livelihoods, but again continue to make sure that we're a vibrant place to live. And so important that the arts not be left out of any kind of rescue plan that we put together as we battle through this pandemic. And we want to make sure no one is left behind. There's certainly lots of assistance out there, and we're here today, of course, to make sure that also the disability led and disability serving organizations know exactly how to access it. So I'd also like to start by thanking all the event organizers, including Ben Kessler, Beth Bienvenu, and also Sara Nash from NEA, and again, of course, Randy from RISCA, and Diane from the National Endowment. So these folks have worked really hard behind the scenes to make this event happen. I am glad that we'll be able to make sure that folks that are hearing impaired will be able to access this later with having the event transcribed. Hopefully folks actually have transcribing ability on their own devices. That might be possible as well. But for those who don't, making sure that they have access to this will be important. So thank you for that. I would just say that the arts play an integral role in our communities. And you know, this brings us together in ways that promote creative thinking and self-expression. Participation in the arts has been shown to improve academic achievement for young people, and is associated with increased engagement in other social and civic activities. The arts also support millions of jobs across the country, as I mentioned, and represent a sizable portion of our economy. In fact, in 2019, the arts and culture accounted for more than 4% of the United States gross domestic product. And that's a lot. No two ways about it. That's a lot. So the arts also provide so many benefits for people with disabilities. For example, participation in the arts can improve cognitive and motor skills, as well as self-esteem and emotional well-being. In addition, art offers an outlet for expressing many of our unique challenges that people with disabilities face. So the benefits, both in general and specifically for people with disabilities, are substantial. Unfortunately, and all of us on this call know, arts organizations across the country have struggled during the COVID-19 pandemic. Social distancing requirements have left arts organizations with no choice but to suspend or eliminate gatherings in performance venues and galleries. Meanwhile, the ongoing economic uncertainty that has strained development offices, reduced operating budgets, and forced many arts organizations to furlough or lay off their staff, very sadly. So I realize how difficult these decisions can be and have been, especially for smaller organizations that operate less like businesses and more like families. So the point I'm trying to make here is that the arts are facing unprecedented challenges, and we can't afford to lose them to this pandemic. It really would be truly devastating. And so we want to make sure that doesn't happen. With this in mind, Congress made sure to include substantial funding in the American Rescue Plan Act to help carry arts organizations through this challenging time. The American Rescue Plan Act became law in March and provides a total of $135 million for the National Endowment for the Arts to distribute as grants to organizations across the country. It further specifies that 40% of these grants must be distributed through state and regional arts organizations like RISCA, while 60% must be distributed directly from NEA to recipients. So NEA, RISCA, and other state arts councils are working hard to make these funds available to organizations like yours. And over the next hour, we're going to learn a lot more about what this looks like. So before I turn things back over to Randy, I'd just like to highlight one more thing. Public funding for the arts is just so important, even outside of the COVID-19 pandemic. It's something all of us in the Ocean State know so well. After all, the late, great Senator Claiborne Pell was the prime sponsor of the legislation creating the NEA and NEH. Again, a reason why, as a congressman from Rhode Island, as part of this great congressional delegation that we have with Jack and Sheldon and David, and I'm honored to be included and be a part of this delegation. We all take great pride in being champions for the arts, being champions for the humanities, because really these organizations got their start here in Rhode Island with the leadership of Senator Pell. And I feel a personal responsibility to carry on his legacy as someone I consider to be a role model and a mentor and a former colleague. So for this reason, I send a letter to the House Appropriations Committee every year to request strong support for the National Endowment for the Arts. For the 2022 fiscal year, the Appropriations Committee is recommending $201 million for NEA, which is a $33 million increase over the enacted fiscal year 2021 level. So this is huge, and it's going to keep, and I'm going to keep working with my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to make sure the funding is included in the final appropriations bill for the upcoming year. So again, I see that we have the interpreter on the line that's helping interpret it for the hearing impaired and deaf community. You know, I will say that you know, you know, closed captioning and American Sign Language interpretation I'm pleased that it's going to be available during the event. The closed caption will come later as we transcribe the event, but I'm glad we have our interpreter here. I know this event is so important, and you know, we've all had so many Zoom calls over the past year, and I think it's safe to say that providing services to the deaf and hard of hearing individuals is not the norm. And you know, as the world moves increasingly online, we really need to make sure that accessibility is prioritized in these vital spaces. So otherwise, we run the risk of leaving millions of people with disabilities behind, and that's simply unacceptable. So thank you to Ben and Beth and Randy for including these important services that make a difference. So just in closing, let me just say again, a huge thank you to everyone, again, the National Endowment for the Arts and the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts for organizing this event. I really do hope that you all, everyone on the call, takes full advantage of these funding opportunities. And again, honored to be with you. Great to see Diane again. Madam Chair, good luck in your tenure. All the best. Please call on me if I can be of service in any way. That goes for you, Randy, as well, and everyone on the call. So my office and I stand ready to assist in any way. So with that, Randy, thanks so much, and I'll turn it back over to you.
Thank you, Congressman. My apologies for any of the problems that you may be experiencing with ASL interpretation. I think we now have the ability, each individual person, to pin the ASL interpreter to your own space. But if you're still running into problems, please continue to send me text, chat messages, and I will do the very best I can to straighten the technology out. Congressman Langevin, thank you so much for your remarks and for your support. We're delighted also to have with us, I believe you said you're on your 16th day as Senior Chair of the National Endowment for the Arts, Diane Dewhirst. Chair Dewhirst, if you could share some remarks with us, that would be great.
Sure. First of all, I'm on day 16. I'm honored to be with you, Randy, and Congressman. I'm just going to tell folks that there is not a day that went by when I either saw you close up or from afar that I was not inspired by you. I had the privilege to work in the House of Representatives for 16 years and for Speaker Pelosi. And this gentleman who is with us today is truly an inspiring leader in small ways and in big ways. Rhode Island is well served. His communities are well served. The arts are well served. And the communities that are represented on this call are extremely well served, not only by him, but his staff. And as you know, none of us, I'm a staffer. I know I have chair in my title, but I'm a staffer. I'm a big believer in staff, and nothing could be done. Well, almost nothing could be done without staff. But this gentleman who is with us, Mr. Langevin, Congressman Langevin, is truly an example of leadership that needs to be repeated and replicated all over the world. So I'm honored to be here with you, sir. And I thank your staff, and I thank Randy's organization for help putting this together. And for my new colleagues at the NEA, I'm getting to know all this. Ben has been a terrific Director of Congressional Relations, and I look forward to working with him. My name is Diane Dewhirst. I am here in Washington, D.C. on my back porch, what my mother used to call my Florida room, but I'm on Capitol Hill. I am a white woman with blue eyes and blondish today, hair to my shoulders. So I think I did that right, Beth. But anyway, I'm going to turn it back to you, Randy. And again, thank you for the honor. And thank you, Congressman.
Okay, thank you to everyone in participation. I am slowly getting this, the hang of this particular presentation, so I apologize for any inconvenience that anyone is experiencing. Let me ask people who are not speaking to possibly mute their video as well as their audio as we start to move into the next section. I'm going to put a PowerPoint presentation up on the screen. It will be presented by the various and sundry members of the National Endowment for the Arts staff who are present with us. If you have any questions as we go through this PowerPoint presentation, please use the chat function. We have staff that are going to be monitoring the chat and will be able to summarize and present some of these questions so that we can all learn from the answers. For now, let me introduce you. Let me just say before we jump into the National Endowment for the Arts section that as a state arts agency director, there are state arts agencies throughout the country who also have American Rescue Plan funding that can be made available to nonprofit organizations in their state. We have a program here that we're doing in cooperation with our Humanities Council. Other states are doing other kinds of things. I would urge anybody in this call to, by all means, contact your state arts agency. Every state has one, and see what resources might be available to support the work that you are doing in your various states. That said, I'm going to share the PowerPoint presentation. If I can, there it is. And go back to the beginning. And I will turn things over to Ben Kessler, who is the Congressional liaison for the National Endowment for the Arts. And are you all seeing the Grants Workshop PowerPoint on your screen?
We are. I don't know if it's possible, Randy, to make it full screen so the slide takes up the entire space.
I thought I had done that. I thought I had done that.
That's okay. We can proceed if that presents any problems.
Let's do the best we can.
Randy, you can use the little, there's an icon at the bottom. It looks like a little podium.
Yeah, already done that, and it doesn't seem to be doing it. Okay.
I'll unmute myself. Let's get started. Thank you so much, Randy. My name is Ben Kessler. I am Director of Congressional Affairs. I'm a white man with what I claim is brown hair and a red beard. Some people would tell you that I have red hair, but I will argue with you about that. I'm wearing a black jacket and a white shirt, a white collared shirt with some stripes on it. And really just so excited to be here today. Thank you, Congressman Langevin, to your staff. The thought that we would do this, speaking to disability-led and disability-serving arts organizations without you, Congressman, just wouldn't be right. We're so grateful for your leadership in both spaces. Randy, absolutely correct of just how lucky we are to have the entire Rhode Island delegation. And to Diane's point about just staff work, it's been such a pleasure working with your staff, Congressman, Alec and Mark. Just thank you so much. I know a lot of work went into making this happen and we're so grateful. So thank you so much. If we could just proceed to the next slide, please, Randy. So I'll be talking about a slide that's a flow chart that generally goes over to our approach on how we reach organizations regardless of ability, race, ethnicity, or zip code. And before we dive into the details about our grant making, we wanted to give you a bit of that overview of our approach. We are working to make sure this funding, the ARP federal funding, as the Congressman so eloquently described, reaches a broad constituency, including organizations that serve populations traditionally underserved by government, including, of course, organizations led by people with disabilities and serving people with disabilities, organizations with small and medium-sized budgets, organizations from rural to urban communities, and organizations that may be applying for federal support through the Arts Endowment for the first time. And we know that if you're applying for federal funds for the first time, you're going to need additional technical assistance. And we want to make sure that we're there for you at every single step. And what's front of mind really for me and my colleagues is a schedule of open Zoom office hours. I'm going to put the schedule into the chat right now. And I believe in August, we'll have a session where captioning will be available. It will be a room that looks a lot like this one. You'll be greeted by a couple Arts Endowment colleagues of ours, and they'll be ready to answer any question you might have. No question too small. If chances are, if you have the question, someone else is too. Come by and listen, just learn from others. Really, we want to hear from you. Register for one, register for all of them. And we really look forward to seeing you there. And we'll provide contact information. So again, you're able to ask questions, up until the moment you hit submit on your application. If we could just go to the next slide, please, Randy.
Yep.
Thank you so much. So the goal for today is not only to provide a deep dive, into the upcoming American Rescue Plan funding opportunity, but really to demystify the National Endowment for the Arts in our application process. We want you to leave this meeting knowing that an NEA grant is within your reach. And again, you have the technical assistance tools that you need, and you'll be in a position to succeed when you submit that application. The presentation will provide a general overview of the NEA, the grant programs we offer, and then we'll get into more of the details about the upcoming opportunity made by the American Rescue Plan that the Congressman described, and really with his leadership was made possible. And we'll make sure we have plenty of time for questions as well. You can just go to the next slide, please, Randy. Thank you so much. So just this slide is taken from our website, has a URL there that you can access American Rescue Plan information, and we'll make sure to duplicate that in the chat as well. So a little bit on how we got here. In addition to our regular annual grant programs, as part of the American Rescue Plan, the National Endowment for the Arts will distribute roughly $135 million. Of that amount, 40% has been allocated already to state and regional arts organizations, just like Randy's, for re-granting through their own programs, We will distribute the remaining 60% to arts organizations and local arts agencies, and that will be the focus of our presentation today. Funding will be available for general operating support, and we'll describe the difference between what general operating support means and our regular grant programs during the presentation. And guidelines are available on our website now. So if you haven't had a chance to take a look, we encourage you to do so as soon as possible. And we'll talk more about the specifics of the ARP program and its support for operating costs near the end of our presentation. Our regular annual grant programs provide project support, and we'll walk through the details on our annual programs now to make sure that you're staying engaged well beyond this upcoming opportunity. And I will now pass it over to Beth Bienvenu, our Director of Accessibility, who I know is known to so many people on this call and needs no introduction, but so grateful to you, Beth, for your leadership in this space. And with that, I'll hand it over to Beth.
Thank you, Ben, and thank you to Congressman Langevin and his staff, and Randy and his staff for making this presentation possible. We're so excited to share this funding opportunity with you. And to provide a visual description, I am a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, wearing a black and white shirt and a blurred background. I'm the Accessibility Director at the NEA, and as part of the NEA's commitment to equity, we wanted to make sure to have this outreach session specifically for the community of artists and art organizations that make the arts accessible and inclusive of people with disabilities. And so we support this work in several ways, which I'll show here. And on this slide, I mentioned that we do that through arts education, professional opportunities for artists with disabilities, and through accessibility. But I'm going to go through this in a little different order. So Randy, if you can go to the next slide. First, I want to mention that we support initiatives and projects that help promote accessibility in the arts, including training and technical assistance on our part. Actually, I mixed up my slides a little bit. I'm going to start with professional opportunities for disabled artists. So we support organizations that provide professional opportunities for disabled artists, including physically integrated dance companies, deaf theater companies, disability film festivals, and many others. This photo is from the production of Deaf West Theater's production of the musical Spring Awakening, and it shows two women on a stage, one playing the guitar and singing while the other gestures in sign language. I want to note that the American Rescue, oh, sorry, I'll get to that in a second. So the next slide, please, Randy. Arts education. So we fund a number of organizations that provide arts education opportunities. This slide features a photo from Creative Growth, a grantee out of Oakland, California, and shows a smiling woman with glasses holding a book open to pages that feature a photo of her, and opposite a photo with a highly decorative chair that she has painted. And third, Randy, next slide.
Okay.
So we also fund accessibility. Organizations that provide accessibility and invest in that. And we also provide technical assistance through our own work. So this slide has a photo from the production of the play Tribes by Studio Theater here in Washington, DC. We provided a grant for them that included the costs for their production to provide access throughout the production. This photo shows a set from the play with 5 actors standing in a kitchen, 2 of them signing to each other with their arms crossed over their chests and the word love projected on the back wall. So that was an example of how you can invest in accessibility through your grant as one of your budget items. But I want to note that what we'll be talking about covers general operating support funds, not project support, as these slides show. But I wanted to give examples of the wonderful work that we've supported throughout the country. So now I'll turn it over to Sara Nash, our Director of Dance, to start our presentation about the ARP grants. Sara?
Hold on. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
I want to make sure that the interpreter is being seen. And unfortunately, while I was doing the slides, something strange happened. Can somebody let me know if the interpreter is being seen on the attendee side? Is anybody able to read the chat? Because I don't seem to have it at the moment.
Randy, I think right now we have 2 people pinned. So if you could unpin Josh and pin just Kylie, that should fix the problem.
Great, thank you for that. Let me see. Josh, I am going to unpin or remove spotlight. There we go. My apologies. We're back in business. Okay.
Okay, thanks, Randy. And if we can go ahead and next slide here. Thank you all. So I'm Sara Nash. I'm the director of dance at the NEA. I use she, her pronouns. I'm a white woman with shoulder length, asymmetrically cut red hair. I have red lipstick. I'm wearing a purple top. And in the background, there are a number of different sizes and colored paintings on the wall. All right, so we're now into ARP, and we're going to cover eligibility on this slide, which is going to cover what I'm going to go through in just a moment. There is also a picture on this slide of Art Mix Indiana in Indianapolis, Indiana, which is a grantee, which shows several different people, one of whom uses a wheelchair outside at an art event. So there are certain requirements that you all will need to meet in order to be eligible to apply to the NEA for a grant. You do need to be a nonprofit at the time that you apply. Or you could also be a unit of state or local government or a federally recognized tribal community or tribe. You do also need to have a 3-year history of arts programming. If you've gotten a previous NEA award, you do need to be in compliance with the reporting requirements. So basically you can't have any late reports due to us at the time that you apply. And for most of our programs, just so you think beyond ARP a little bit, you do need to provide a 1-to-1 cost share and match of non-federal funds, but this is not a requirement for ARP. ARP funds are non-matching. And if we can go to the next slide, please, Randy. All right, so we're going to talk about the application review process. And there's a photograph on this slide of 2 dancers, one of whom is using a wheelchair and another performer who is kind of vaulting off or over the dancer that is seated in the wheelchair. Our typical grant review process includes several levels of review. The first level is a citizen panel, which is made up of experts throughout the field. And for some grant programs, we also include one layperson or someone who's not working directly in the arts. Our panels are diverse in terms of geography and gender, ethnicity, as well as disability and expertise from a range of different areas within their respective fields. And after the citizen panel, the panel recommendations are then submitted to the National Council on the Arts for their review and approval. The council then forwards its recommendations to the chairman of the National Endowment for the Arts, and the chairman provides that final review and approval. If you're interested in being a part of the application review process and serving on one of our panels, we are always looking for new panelists. And we are actually in that process right now, actually. So we're going to talk a little bit more about how you can let us know that you're interested later on in this presentation. One other comment on our process before we move on. Panel feedback is available to applicants for most of our programs. If you apply and you don't ultimately receive a grant, We encourage you to reach out to staff and request that panel feedback. It can be helpful to hear what parts of your application really resonated with panelists, what questions they may have had, and so forth. We may not be able to provide individual panel feedback for ARP applications, but we will have some things in place following the ARP process for those who apply. We can move to the next slide, please. All right, so I'm just going to briefly mention several of our other ongoing and main grant programs because ARP, of course, is happening right now. It's a special relief program, but we want you to also know that there are ongoing grant programs that may also be available to you to look up for the future. For other ways that we can help support you and your work. There are some graphics on this slide that are just kind of briefly trying to illustrate 3 of our main grant programs. Those include Challenge America, Grants for Arts Projects, our main grant program, Our Town, and we also have grants available through our research office. These are the largest grants that we offer, and nonprofit organizations do typically receive the bulk of our direct funding. Generally speaking, you can submit only 1 application per organization per calendar year. There are a few exceptions to that rule, so make sure to check guidelines depending on the program that you are interested in. And again, we're focusing on ARP. We're going to move more into those details, but just remember that there are other resources and options available to you. Next slide, please. All right, so American Rescue Plan Awards. This slide shows a picture of the Anderson Center Deaf Artist Residency, which features a group of people inside a room around a table and a couch with some books and bookcases in the background, and it looks like they're in discussion. So for grants for organizations who are applying to ARP, you may request a grant amount for either $50,000, $100,000, or $150,000. And the applications will be reviewed and considered for recommendation only at one of these 3 requested amounts. The cost share and matching funds, again, for this program are not required. We encourage you to select a grant amount that reflects your organization's size and your internal capacity. And these applications will be reviewed and considered for recommendation at the requested amount only. So whichever amount you choose, just keep in mind the review criteria when you're crafting your application to make the best case. And your application will be evaluated based on the capacity of your organization to carry out the proposal. A grant period of up to 2 years is allowed for ARP, but the grant period can't start earlier than January 1st, 2022. And it's important to note, if any of you are working at local arts agencies and you're interested in subgranting, that of course has slightly separate guidelines than those mentioned here. So just make sure that you are following the correct deadlines for the part of the program you're applying to. And I'm gonna turn it back over to Beth now. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. All right, so the rescue plan funds are intended to support day-to-day business expenses or operating costs and not specific program activities. Please read the guidelines carefully for details about what costs we can support. Support is limited to any or all of the following: salary support, full or partial, for 1 or more staff positions; fees and stipends for artists and or contractual personnel to support services they provide for specific activities as part of organizational operations; facilities costs such as mortgage principal, rent, and utilities; costs associated with health and safety supplies for staff and or visitors or audiences, such as personal protective equipment, cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, etc., and marketing and promotion costs. Let's see, so next slide, please. let's see. Okay, so applications will be reviewed based on our congressionally mandated criteria of artistic excellence and artistic merit of the proposal, which includes the significance of the mission and core work of the organization, the ability to carry out an award as shown by the alignment of the budget and other resources with the goals and requirements of the funding opportunity, as appropriate, potential to serve an immediate impact on the arts workforce, and as appropriate, the potential to serve and or reach individuals whose opportunities to experience the arts are limited by ethnicity, economics, geography, or disability. Next slide. This is a few FAQs that we often get. So we wanted to go over these briefly. So one question is, can I apply to ARP if I've already applied to another NEA grant this year, or other federal relief funds, such as the shuttered venue operational grants or the Paycheck Protection Plan funding? And the answer is yes, you can. However, it's important, I want to pause, make sure the interpreters catch up. Is everybody seeing okay? It's working? It sounds like it's working, okay. You have to make sure that it's important to remember that you cannot use multiple federal grants to fund the same activities or costs. Each grant should be funding something different. Additionally, you can't use ARP or other federal relief funds in order to meet the matching requirements of other NEA grant programs, such as our grants to arts projects. Another question is, are work samples required for ARP applications? No, they are for our other grants, but not for ARP. And what is the difference between project-based grant and a general operating grant? In a project-based grant, all of the costs must relate to the execution of a specific project. In an operations-based grant, eligible costs are not tied to a specific project. For example, you may include staff salaries for your curatorial team, as well as artist fees or stipends for teaching artists in your education department, even if these people will not be working together on the same activities. Similarly, fees and stipends for fees and stipends for artists and contract personnel must support the services they normally provide for specific activities as part of organizational operations. So next slide. So some things to remember. There are a few things to keep in mind as you prepare an ARP application, such as ensuring that you are registered with DUNS, D-U-N-S, SAM, and grants.gov. These are separate agencies from the NEA, so we can't assist you if you encounter any difficulties. We will not accept late applications, so be sure that your application is complete and submitted on time. Submit part 1 well in advance of the August 12th deadline to give yourself ample time to resolve any issues, and that is open now, so you can do that right now. And likewise, submit all of your part 2 materials to the applicant portal well in advance of the deadline. The hours of heaviest usage are usually 8 p.m. to 11:59 p.m. Eastern time on the day of the deadline. So avoid using the system at this time as possible. So get it in early. Every year we have applicants working up against the last minute and unfortunately run out of time. So do it as early as you can. So turn it back over to Sara. Slide.
All right, so how to apply. This is showing a screenshot of our website that says how to apply under ARP, American Rescue Plan, grants to organizations. And there's a menu on the left-hand side of that screen, and about halfway down, it says how to apply. So you want to click that. And that will give you some step-by-step instructions on how to apply. Next slide, please. Finding the right form. So this slide is showing kind of 3 flow charts horizontally, each in a different color to help you locate the correct form and deadline. So you'll see the 2-part process is going to be the same for both local arts agencies and arts organizations who are applying to ARP, but the deadlines in part 1 form are different. So most of you probably fit into the arts organization category. You'll be submitting your corresponding SF424 form to grants.gov by August 12th. If the name of your organization starts with the letters A through L, then you'll submit part 2 of your application between August 19th through the 25th. And if your organization's name starts with the letters M through Z, you'll apply between August 27th and September 2nd. If your organization's name starts with either the or another article, you'll go by the first word after that in your name. And again, if you follow the guidance on the aforementioned how to apply page, it will take you to all of the right forms and deadlines. Next slide, please. So again, here is a screenshot showing both the sam.gov homepage and the grants.gov homepage. As we mentioned earlier, part 1 of the application process is where you'll work with these 2 federal government systems. SAM stands for System for Award Management, and grants.gov. You do need to have up-to-date registrations as well as the correct permissions through these systems to apply. So once you have current accounts in both of these systems, the actual form that you submit for part 1, again, is called the SF424 form. And basically this form provides some basic brief information about your organization. It doesn't take too long to fill out. You're not required to submit really specific details about your project in this first step. So just think of this part 1 step as submitting your intent to apply and giving us some basic information about your organization. Next slide, please. How to apply part 2. This again shows screenshots of the NEA's applicant portal, which is for part 2. So this is our actual Arts Endowment grant application form. And this is where you're going to submit the bulk of information in your application and all of the specifics about the ARP grant that you're applying for. You'll put together your project narrative here, the budget, and details on key personnel. The grant application form is submitted through our own online platform. We call this the applicant portal. And the guidelines for each of our funding programs, including ARP, are all posted on our website at arts.gov. And it includes step-by-step, literally line-by-line instructions on using the applicant portal and how to apply. The instructions for part 2 are already available. You can start working on that now. Again, and as soon as the applicant portal opens, you can begin to submit it. The part 2 instructions, again, found on the how to apply webpage from earlier. And that document there goes through all of the questions that you're going to need to answer, including not just the questions themselves, but also some helpful tips, screenshots of the applicant portal, and the character count for each of the application fields. All right, I'm going to turn it back over to Beth. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. So that's kind of the nuts and bolts of how the application works. We'll talk about some of the other technical assistance tools in a moment, but we would love for you to stay connected with us and the National Endowment for the Arts. We release regular newsletters that highlight upcoming grant program deadlines, as well as events and resources. So it's a great way to keep up with what's going on with the Arts Endowment and find news from around the country. So please subscribe. You can go to our website at arts.gov, and at the bottom of the homepage is a button for newsletters. You can click there and sign up for any newsletter topics that most interest you. So this slide just features some sample images from our newsletter. So on the next screen, there's a lot of contact information. We can't really read it all out, but we'll be sending out the slides after the presentation so you can access it then. There are separate email addresses for whether your organization with legal names beginning A through L or M through Z. That's just a way to break it up with the large volume of emails and calls that we're getting. So that there's also a separate separate phone numbers for A through L or M through Z. And a good question in the chat was, if your organization name starts with a digit, like a 3, you'll reach out to the A through L, or the A through L email and phone, and also that is your deadline will correspond with the A through L. And there's more information in our guidelines about that. If you have any specific requests for like right at the moment, right now, if you're interested in knowing what the email addresses or phone, put that in the chat or the Q&A, and I can pop that in for you. And you can also reach the Office of Accessibility at accessibility@arts.gov. And we'll get back to you. And on the next slide, we mentioned the upcoming live Q&A sessions that you can sign up for as you're preparing your application. This information is on our website at arts.gov/ARP-grants. And I want to note again, like I did in the chat, that the Q&A session is next Wednesday, July 28th at 11 a.m. will include sign language interpretation and captioning. So if you weren't able to access any of this today, you can attend that and ask your questions directly. There are other sessions coming up, and you can access, and you need to register in advance. And next slide. And as we mentioned earlier, we are looking for new voices to bring into our panel process. In an effort to build equity into our grant making, we want to make sure that people with disabilities are on our panels to bring their unique lived experience to the grant review process, which is incredibly important. So we invite you to consider becoming a panelist or letting your colleagues know that this is an opportunity. We're looking for people across the country representing all diversities, but I want to encourage people with disabilities to sign up, because we really would love to have you on our panels. And it's also a great way to connect with us, learn about the process, and it's a great professional development opportunity. So if you're interested, there's a form on our website. There's a URL. It's a bit long, but it's pasted into the chat. And this slide features a graphic just showing a person sitting at a computer with a cup of coffee. So you can review the grants while on your computer with a cup of coffee or tea. So that's it for the presentation side. We're going to jump into a Q&A session. And I would like to introduce one of our amazing colleagues, Eleanor Billington, who has joined us recently to really help us with this. And she and Ben will be answering any questions you have. So please enter any questions into the chat. I don't know if we want to invite people to ask their questions you can raise your hand using the raise hand function. And if you want to speak your questions, we can. Yeah,
I think we can try all sorts of ways, and we'll be monitoring the chat, Q&A, raise hand, and yes, thank you, Eleanor, truly the issue expert when we're thinking of technical assistance. So we're so glad to have Eleanor. I know we're short on time and not sure on our ability to keep our sign language interpreters here, but let's do the best we can. And we look forward to answering your questions here, drop by the live Q&A sessions, and of course, stay in touch. So a question that came into the chat, will the panels be looking at lost income during the pandemic and its, excuse me, and its aftermath, or is it the focus on to sustain the organization in general? So I think that question came in around when Beth and Sara were sharing the slide on criteria. While these funds are intended to provide relief dollars, as Beth described, I'll let Eleanor talk a little bit just about how to create that narrative and tell the story about your organization and what these funds could possibly mean.
Thanks, Ben, and thank you all for letting me be here today. I will give you a quick visual description. My name is Eleanor. Again, I'm a white woman with shoulder-length brown hair, and I have little orange dots on my collared shirt today. So in terms of displaying or a financial need or a deficit, no. You do not have to, that's not an eligibility criteria for ARP funding. However, as Ben said, we are intending these funds to support your general operating so that we hope they can touch on many different parts of your organization. So it's not a criteria to apply, certainly, and it's not something that we're necessarily asking our panel to look at. When panels review applications, they do not base their review on need specifically. They look at our eligibility criteria, and then they also look at the criteria that Beth and Sara discussed. And I can drop a link into the chat about where exactly that criteria is on our website, so you can see exactly what your panelists will be looking at. And we really advise you to keep that in mind as you're crafting your application, because it will help guide you in terms of what you may request in your proposal to budget, and how you talk about things like the constituency that you serve, the demographics that you serve, how COVID has impacted your community. There will certainly be a space in your narrative to describe that. We've tried to streamline the narrative as much as possible, but also hit that balance of giving you the space to, like Ben said, tell your story and to explain how important this funding would be for your organization.
Great, thank you so much, Eleanor. A question came in during the presentation about if my organization receives funding from a state arts agency. I think we'll just pause just a second to make sure we're pinning the correct interpreter. Randy, do you mind?
Yep, spotlight. There you go. Oops, wait a second. Hold on. Go ahead.
I don't think Kylie is pinned, I don't think.
Okay, hold on. Kylie, where are you? There you are. Spotlight for everybody. Okay, there you go.
Okay, please let us know in the chat if anyone is having difficulty seeing our interpreter. I'll move on, but again, please let us know in the chat or raise your hand if you're having any problems. The question about if I received funds from my state arts agency, am I eligible for this opportunity? The short answer is unequivocally yes. We want to make sure that you take a look at the guidelines for your state arts agency, but we also want to really encourage you to apply broadly. We're so excited to distribute this funds made possible by the American Rescue Plan and Congressman Langevin's leadership. That being said, we are mindful of the fact that there's so much need in the field and we won't be able to fulfill every application. So absolutely apply through us, apply through your regional arts organization, those 6 that we put up on the map earlier during the presentation, as well as through Randy and your local arts agency, as well as other opportunities made possible by the federal government, thinking about the Shuttered Venue Operators Grant Program and PPP, the Paycheck Protection Program. But Eleanor, any thoughts on how to apply broadly, but of course, avoiding overlapping costs?
Well, that's the point that I was going to make. You can't apply for the same thing.
Right.
Ben, I think you've covered it. You've done a great job. If you have any questions or you're concerned about the specifics there, talk to us, reach out to us at that contact information that is going to be in the presentation that's shared with everyone and that we've dropped in the chat function as well. Just reach out to us. Also, it may impact you guys depending on when your grant period is. So if you receive a grant, you have the opportunity to be flexible with that grant period. You can request a grant period of up to 2 years, and that may help you in terms of moving money around and making sure that you're meeting that requirement of no overlapping costs, but also having as much funding available to you as possible.
Great, thank you so much for that, Eleanor. A question that I think Eleanor will be able to answer, but Beth, if you want to jump in as well, about a human service organization who they host arts programs about once a year, locally and regionally. And the question is, can the funding be used for general operations to cover our accessibility resources, such as ASL interpreting services? So Eleanor, I don't know if you have thoughts, but Beth would certainly welcome your jumping in as well.
For our usual grants, I know that the costs can go toward covering ASL captioning, et cetera. But I believe it's only for the arts component. And Eleanor, can you say anything about the ARP?
Sure, I can speak a little bit more to ARP, and I think this is a great question for us to follow up on. It's a really important thing to discuss now, but also to take back to my colleagues at the Arts Endowment and talk a little bit more, because right now ARP funding is specifically marked for operational costs, so things that are required for you to do your daily organizational work. And in some cases, we can look at particular costs and say, okay, this is allowable, this isn't. So it may be something that we can certainly support, but we would need to look at the specific specific situation just to see if it's okay with our grants office. And so please get in touch with me directly. I submitted my contact information in the chat, and I'll do it again. And we can certainly talk about that because, as Beth said, it's a part of our regular grant making process. And so we just need to make sure that the ARP funds can cover those services as well. So I hope that gives you a little bit of context. It's not a hard yes or no answer. We just need to talk about it, and feel free to reach out to me. Thank you so much for that question.
Yeah, and just to jump back in, for the regular grant, I would recommend talking with one of the grant specialists when the time comes, and because they can also help clarify.
Great, thank you so much, Beth and Eleanor. Similar question, but slightly different, about a virtual organization. So an organization that exists solely on the internet, about web fees, software costs, developer expenses, and equipment rental. Eleanor, do you mind answering that one?
Sure. So in terms of equipment rental or equipment purchases, ARP funds are unfortunately not allowable for specific equipment rental and purchases. The equipment purchases are mostly tied to safety, cleaning supplies, hand sanitizer, PPE, anything for participants. I know that's less helpful for you because you're a virtual organization, but other things that we may be able to support are things like if you are working with a web designer or developer who's doing maintenance on the website, or any other staff who are prepping the website for certain events. All of their time spent working to those, working towards those goals, those particular programming elements would certainly be allowed. In terms of costs for the NEA. So there are many things that we can support in terms of funding and promotional activities too. So I'm imagining all of that is happening for you guys in the virtual space, and that's certainly an allowable cost as well. And if you don't mind, Ben, I want to jump back to the previous question really quickly if I can. I know we're short on time, but I did want to say that some of the costs that in regards to providing live captioning or accessibility for particular events may be included under our some admin costs or general overhead that you may have for particular events. So that's another area in the budget that is allowed, and that's in relationship to indirect costs. So if those are things that you're normally supporting and they're a part of your indirect cost rate, then that would certainly be allowable. So I should have made that clear from the start. And again, please follow up with me about that question. Thank you.
Great, thank you so much, Eleanor, and thank you for the additional details on the earlier question. A question about just clarifying the difference between part 1 and part 2. I'll just say very quickly. So part 1 is the SAMs and grants.gov. So that means you're putting your information into systems that are federal government wide. So we don't have access to the back end of those systems. I put a link to the chat. Maybe we can do it again about some tips if you are applying for federal funding for the first time. And SAM and grants.gov have really great customer service of their own. And we have the contact information available on that page. But Eleanor, any thoughts just about differentiating part 1 and part 2?
Yes, so part 1 is you have to have that SAM.gov and grants.gov registration complete for part 1. And that's something that you have to do across the board if you're applying for a federal fund. So regardless of the agency. So once you get that registration done, which is a big hurdle, it can take a long time. So we say, please, start now, especially with SAM.gov. But once you get through that process, you'll upload a very brief form. This is just a form that says, we want to know the name of your organization. We need to know a couple of different things about contacts at your organization, but this is about a 1.5-page form that you will then submit through grants.gov. Once that happens, you will have completed part 1 of the application. So it really is, it's a way for us to say, okay, they are serious about doing this. They want to come in for a grant application. And then part 2 is where you're going to submit the bulk of the application. And on our website right now, under the How to Apply section, you can find the instructions for part 2. So we encourage you to prepare early. So you can go ahead and go online already. I know this was mentioned in the presentation, but I can slip a link into the chat too, where you can just see that PDF of instructions because it is buried a little bit down the webpage. And I know our website is quite dense in some respects. So I can send you guys a direct link too, so you can then begin to prepare for part 2. So part 1 is sort of like the entree, part 2 is the meal. It's the main event in terms of just what you're asking for funding. Thanks, Ben.
Great, thank you, Eleanor. And we'll try and move through just the questions in the chat and try and wrap up. And thanks so much for sticking with us past when we were originally planning on closing things out, but we're really grateful for you to sticking around and continue to ask questions. A question about whether a municipality receiving funding through the American Rescue Plan, so other parts of the federal government, can also receive ARP funding? The short answer is yes, absolutely. And we would encourage you to apply. Just want to reiterate to avoid overlapping costs, as you can't receive, of course, funding for the exact same costs through general ARP funding, as well as through the National Endowment for the Arts. Thank you for that question. And again, please apply broadly with every opportunity. Just scrolling to see more questions in the chat. Thanks for sticking with us. So I think one question that came in through the Q&A was whether if someone volunteers to a panelist, can they also submit a proposal? I believe the answer is yes, but of course you just can't consider your own proposal. But Eleanor, any thoughts about if I'm missing something there?
Ben, you're totally right. That's
perfect. And I think, so with that, I think just I would close out with just one last thought, if that's okay, Randy, and I know that we're over time, is because I know it's front of mind for so many, is remember that you may only apply for 3 different funding levels: $50,000, $100,000, and $150,000. And as an agency, we're only able to fund at the level for which you apply. And so that means there's a lot riding on the decision that you make on how much to apply for. But what we want to emphasize is that no part of this application process, and certainly not this question, is meant to trip you up. It's not a gotcha question. We're not trying to figure out if you're being greedy. This question is something that only you can answer, and the answer will be what's right for your organization based on your budget and based on your needs. And that's really just so important about staying in touch with us and making sure that you're able to get to the right answer. But Eleanor, I know that you've eloquently described how to come up really with that right funding level before, and maybe you could close us out before we pass it back over to Randy with some additional thoughts there.
Sure, I can speak to that a little bit. And that is the #1 question that we get asked the most, is how do I decide how much money to come in for? And I know we've mentioned the review criteria to you all before in the presentation, but I would encourage you to go to the website and look at it, look at what we've published, what we will be giving our reviewers, so that you have those things kind of percolating in your mind while you are going through and preparing the application. And we do want you to ask for what you need. And we do want you to consider that the panel will be looking at capacity and at your ability to manage the grant. But I think you want to just think about all of those things kind of tracking together, thinking about the criteria, what you're describing in the narrative portion of the proposal, and then how that all links back to your budget, so that the panel feels confident in terms of the review process for you, saying, okay, this is all making sense, to us. And I know it can be very, very difficult to come up with that number. So I will say one more time, please reach out to us if you're considering two different ones, or if you feel like, okay, what's going to happen if I ask for 150? If everybody asks for 150, does that make me less competitive? No, we don't have a certain amount of grants like Ben was referencing and others that are given at a particular level. So this really is about looking at the application content itself and judging that against that criteria that's on our website. Thanks, Ben.
Thank you so much, Eleanor. And with that, I'll pass it over to Randy to close us out. Thank you, Randy.
Okay. First of all, thanks to our friends at the National Endowment for the Arts. I will say that they are incredibly responsive. And if you pick up the phone and call or send an email or contact them in any way, you will hear back from them. Thanks to Congressman James Langevin for kicking us off and being our host for today. It's an incredible honor to work with Congressman Langevin, and he is an incredibly productive member of Congress for Rhode Island and for the entire nation, and extremely supportive of the arts. And welcome to Senior Deputy Chairman Dewhirst. We're delighted to have you on board as well. Thanks to our sign language interpreters for putting up with my technological issues. I'm usually pretty good at technology, but today was a particular challenge, and we will record. We will make sure that the recording is made available to everyone. We will make sure that the recording is transcribed in an appropriate way and sent out to everyone who signed up to participate in this workshop. It may take us a couple of days since we're coming into a weekend now, but we'll get that out to you as soon as we possibly can. And I want to remind you, and Beth, you can remind us of the date and time, that there is an upcoming workshop that will be ASL interpreted and closed captioning. And I would imagine, based on the experience we've had here today, that there'll be extra effort paid toward making sure that that works and works well. Beth, what's the date and time?
I was just
It's not memorized?
I was just typing in the chat. Next Wednesday, July 28th at 11 a.m. Eastern. So we'll have ASL and captioning.
Great. So thank you to everyone. On behalf of the Rhode Island State Council on the Arts and the great state of Rhode Island, we're delighted that you joined us today, and we wish you an excellent day and a safe and restful weekend. Thanks, everyone.